Hello, and welcome to a special Thanksgiving special report from Catholic Family News on Father Hector Bolduc. Thanksgiving is not a Catholic holiday, obviously, but the virtue of giving thanks, of gratitude, is a Catholic virtue, and therefore one that this time of year we should certainly practice. And one of the things we do need to be grateful for in the traditional Catholic movement are those early pioneers, those people who went out when there were very, very few people clinging to tradition in the church and stood against the revolution and kept the tradition going. Obviously, Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre is at the top of that list. No one who attends a traditional Latin Mass today would do so but for the Archbishop. But he did have other collaborators fairly quickly to work with him and help him. And one of those, particularly for Americans, that is incredibly important is Father Hector Bolduc, who was really practically standing alone, one of a handful of priests in the beginning, serving almost all of North America to preserve the traditional Mass. And we are delighted today to interview two special guests, Mr. Tom Summers, who is the author of this recently published book on Father Bolduc, and Father Finnegan, who was overlapped in the seminary with Father Bolduc, worked with him for many years, and will share some of his memories. So we're going to welcome them to the studio. So welcome, Father. Welcome, Mr. Summers.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having us.
Great. Well, if we can just start by talking about the book, which is available on Amazon for our viewers. How did this project start? Where did the idea for the book come about?
Well, we had a board meeting of a corporation called Traditional Catholics of New Hampshire in late 2016, early 2017, and this corporation called TCNH was a corporation to keep fathers' assets under some protection. And at that board meeting, I mentioned that, geez, Father is awful interesting. We ought to talk to the people that knew Father Bolduc besides ourselves and get some stories. And the board agreed with that and said, since you thought of the idea, Tom, you ought to call these people. So no problem. It was a very enjoyable project because I knew part of Father Bolduc's life, but not as much as all these other people. I contacted maybe close to 100 people and gathered their stories. Father Finnegan here is one of those people that I contacted, and I gathered a lot of information, but there were gaps and contradictions. And we're talking about people's memory that's 50 years old, 40 years old. And so that I said I got to resolve those contradictions in order to get the story out. And my objective, because I'm a engineering type person, was to do the research and then pass it on to a well qualified author. Uh, at
Excellent.
that point, I talked to Ernest Bolduc, who was the older brother of Father Bolduc, and he said, "Well, there are these diaries. He kept them since the age of 7. Would you like to look at those?" And I said, "Well, yes, that would be super." And there's about 20,000 pages of diaries. They always started off with a weather report because Father was a farmer type kid. And I went through those and captured those in a Word document, and I started fitting all the pieces together and being able to say what happened when, and I got some insights into Father. He was number one. I think Father Finnegan will agree. He worked awful hard, and but he didn't sleep much. So during those hours, he would keep his diary. During those up hours, late at night, he would keep those diaries, and also a second level of information that was very valuable, which were journals. Journals were personal reflections, much more in depth into whatever he was writing about. So I captured those and got them all set, kind of put a narrative together that was a research document, and started contacting potential authors. One of my criteria was that I wanted them to understand the traditional movement and what we were fighting for. Contacted maybe 20 different people, and for various reasons, it didn't work out for this person because they thought Father Bolduc was too complex and awful hard to write about. Another person didn't have time, but the end result was um, just about a year ago, I finally resolved that I guess I was to be that author as best that could do. And so I took the research document and cleaned it up best as a engineering major could do, and got Father Paul Kimball said he'd be glad to help with the publishing, interfacing with the
Right.
publisher. And Mrs. Patricia Peterson said she'd be the editor, which she did a fantastic job with that. And that's kind of the history of how we got to the book where it is today being published.
Excellent. Obviously, a lot of hours of work and group effort went into that. Well, why don't we just start a little bit at the beginning? Father was born into a New Hampshire family. She said a farm family. Here's a picture, and for our viewers, this is a website. Father Bolduc is Fr Bolduc. Is the website with a lot of background information if you want to find more. But here's a picture of the Bolduc family. Tell us which person in the picture will be the later Father Bolduc. Oh, are you there?
Yeah, I'm there.
Oh, yes. Can you tell us which person in the picture is Father Bolduc in this picture?
Could you make it a little bigger? I think he's the third from the
Oh,
left back row.
third from the left back row. Okay. Um, Very good. Well, this is his family, and if you're interested in his family, there was a PBS actually did a series on various American families, and one episode of that is on actually the Bolduc family. So you can see that there's a link from this website, which is a fascinating story about this kind of all-American family. But Father grew up there. He sensed a religious vocation. He tried various seminaries, which was a challenge in the 1960s. But he eventually makes his way to Archbishop Lefebvre and Econe. So I guess either of you, Father or Mr. Summers, do you know how? Could you explain to us how Father Bolduc found the Archbishop? How did he find Econe?
Well, I'll tell my research on that. Father was down at the Catholic University in Washington, going in probably his 8th or 9th year of seminary, and he thought that he could change the religion of the Catholic Church back to tradition inside the Catholic Church, and he struggled with that for 8 or 9 years. I think it was 9 years in total. But while he was at the Catholic University, he met at the time, Clarence Kelly, who worked with Father Bolduc on a couple publications at the Catholic University trying to promote the traditional faith. Father Kelly, a year before Father Bolduc did, found Econe and went over there and was a seminarian. And obviously, he was communicating with Father Bolduc about how great the seminary was. And so, 1973, Father Bolduc headed over to Catholic University, over to Econe. I'm
To
sorry.
Econe, yes. An actual Catholic university, unlike the other. Yes.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So, Father, you were also then in Econe for that year 73, 74. Do you have an earliest memory of Father Bolduc as a seminarian? Any you remember meeting him for the first time?
The opening retreat, Father Bolduc was one of those who would have been considered my class, with a major difference that Father Bolduc had completed all his studies and was entering out of a spirit of piety and humility, presenting himself to Archbishop Lefebvre as a candidate for the priesthood, which he didn't know when. But he was very impressed with the fact that his friend, Father Clarence Kelly, had been ordained and had a proper education, and Father Bolduc wanted part of that, and so now he was there. I had never been in a seminary before. I had finished school in a Catholic college and done an additional year of just Latin and philosophy because a priest friend told me we could not enter a seminary, well, one of the seminaries in America, without that year of Latin and philosophy, because at night you're going to be in the library studying the old Latin text, and during the day you're going to be staring at these modernists and trying to get past them. And so that was my strategy. So after 6 years of undergraduate study, I thought that over, and when I heard about Archbishop Lefebvre, I opted for that. It was the absolute dream and solution. If there really was such a seminary, I wanted to be there. And when I saw Econe, it was exactly that. And my first recollection of Father Bolduc was he was there bigger than life. He was like you went in second grade to see all your little second grade friends for the first day of the year. And there was one guy who was maybe a high school graduate. And you said, what he's doing here? What's this guy doing here? It reminds me of St. Ignatius of Loyola. He had no education formal whatsoever. He was converted by the Holy Virgin Mary. He did that retreat at Manresa with the aid of a Dominican priest. After this, he determined that he would have all the education that he never had. So he entered school with fourth graders. Well, here was Father Bolduc, the experienced, perfect seminarian, which was hidden from all of us. All we could see was his age and his brilliance, which stood out, and his great dynamism. This you could read in him. And here he was. I said, well, what's he doing here? Who is this guy? He was the one who drew all my attention. And of course, that passed because, introductions are simple, they're surprising, and the mysteries of life of that kind are never resolved. You simply live with it, and day by day, year by year, you begin to understand what was that I saw. That was Hector L. Bolduc, Hector Ludgar Bolduc. Remember, the favorite wife of Charlemagne was Ludgar. And I wonder if there wasn't some connection.
So you both would have been in Econe then in November of 1974 when the Archbishop came back from Rome and read to you, the seminarians, his famous declaration.
Yes.
Do you remember talking about that after among the seminarians or with Father Bolduc? What your thoughts were after the Archbishop shared this?
Well, actually, Father Bolduc was ordained in June of 1974, and I do not recall that he was there when the Archbishop returned. But Father Bolduc was so well informed, he would have had it from 5 or 6 different sources, because that's the way the man was. You couldn't keep him from the information. So I do not know how he came upon it, but whatever sources he had, even though I heard the Archbishop with my own ears, Father Bolduc's were superior, believe me.
Well, then, as you say, he was ordained in 74, and he came to America. And what was the state of traditional masses in America when Father arrived here in the early 70s?
Well, great generosity on the part of the priest. We had Father Clarence Kelly working in New York. We had still Father Anthony Ward running a seminary in a place called Armada, Michigan, taking care of our seminarians. And you had Father Clarence Kelly assisted by the newly ordained, when Father Bolduc arrived, actually, it was just Father Bolduc and Father Kelly, and Father Gregory Post had already been ordained, but he was in California. And so it was Father Post, Father Bolduc, and Father Kelly, and this Father Ward. They were the absolute beginners. And that's that. And Father Bolduc, of course, was assigned to assist Father Anthony Ward at the seminary, and eventually found his way down to Texas as, divine providence led him there. And it was in Texas where Father Bolduc started to show himself. He started to give the hints of what he was about. And his career began. I hate to call it that because it's kind of a worldly concept. I don't know what other words to use. But Father Bolduc turned everything into gold. Whoever he was, he warmed the people's hearts. He encouraged them. They were not the tiny little groups that they thought they were. They were the Roman Catholic Church as members, not as separate in any sense, no concept of schism. They were good Catholics. They were to be encouraged, and they had the Archbishop's word for it, and they had the eternal teaching of the Church and of all the great papal encyclicals. So they had nothing to do but work hard and keep their heads down. And this worked for Father Bolduc. Before I knew it, there was this establishment in St. Mary's. It was an incredible thing. And its buildup, plus his first parish in Dickinson, Texas, Queen of Angels, which was built by Italian immigrants, I believe, in the 1940s, as the Shrine of the True Cross. Beautiful church made out of concrete in the Spanish style, with a huge concrete crucifix on the outward face of the church. Then he turned that. It had been gutted. Everything had been removed. All statues, pews, everything. Nothing remained. No altar rail, nothing. Father completely outfitted it from various things that he picked up. A hospital chapel in Kansas City had been sold on the market, and Father Bolduc was up there and replaced all those things. And before you knew it, Queen of Angels had a marble communion rail and a marble altar, and everything was nicely appointed. His beautiful side altar had a large painting that Father Bolduc had acquired from his own art dealing of the Assumption of the Virgin Mary. And on from there. It was from Queen of Angels that he sprung forward to many places.
And again, here is a picture of the Archbishop visiting Dickinson, which the priory we were just speaking about.
Yes.
I think he's signing his apologia, I think. There. So so clearly a very important place. It's where the Angelus Press started with Father Pulvermacher, who came on board at the time of Father Bolduc. And then you mentioned St. Mary's. Can we maybe talk a little bit about St. Mary's? What was Father Bolduc's role in acquiring St. Mary's for the society?
Well, there was an employee of the telephone company. I don't, that changed names, so I don't know in that region if it was Bell Telephone or Central Bell. But his name was Dave Gaynor. He was a Marine veteran, and he found this property and told Father Bolduc, this huge Jesuit property is available, and it's owned by this corporation. And the short of it is, Father Bolduc obtained it from the corporation as a donation, and he would pay their taxes, or he would pay something, closing costs. It was something, he got it for a song. A property that's worth, in the worldly terms of millions and millions of dollars. Father Bolduc obtained it for like 180-some thousand. I don't remember the exact figure. But it was all weeds. The weeds were 20 feet high and full of poison oak and poison ivy. And all the volunteers who went there, the men were breaking out when they had huge bonfires of burning all that stuff, because they cut it down from way up there like Jack and the Beanstalk. They cut it down to just a lawn. And so the oil that flew through the air from the flaming fire infected them. And but they went through all kinds of hardships. All the buildings need to be renovated. The heating system need to be renovated. Father Bolduc came up with the idea of individual heating systems for each building, rather than the old boiler system which ran underground to provide hot water for every building. Father Bolduc provided for everything, and for the families who were there. His first part of it that he opened, he was adamant that the school would begin, and in no time at all, a boarding school began. And he began the Society Supplies the 10th retreats officially in the summer, I believe, of 1980 or 81, because it escapes me, forgive me, but he began men's retreats that summer for the first time, and women's retreats for the first time that summer. And, all the generous families, I don't know where they all came from, but that moved there to support Father. They believed in him. Father Bolduc had the leadership of an apostle. And his humility was so extraordinary. You would enter the room where Father Bolduc was, wondering, where's Father Bolduc? And that was that humble man you were talking to. That was him, the one working the hardest. When I first saw him, I visited as a seminarian. I had just been ordained a subdeacon, and I visited him in the summer, and he was back in Texas. Where's Father Bolduc? He's on the roof. He was on the roof of the church doing shingles.
Well, and speaking of the church, obviously there was a beautiful church that was there at the time it was acquired, but was then sadly destroyed by a fire.
Yes,
Just this past year, the church has finally been rebuilt, the new Immaculata. What do you think, Father
magnificent.
Baldock? Oh, sorry. What do you think Father Baldock would say about the new church, about the consecration of the new Immaculata?
He would have clapped his hands and he would have rejoiced, as he does wherever he is, purgatory or heaven. You know, I'm not Padre Pio, so I can't tell you where he is, but I know he would rejoice.
Uh, so obviously St. Mary's and Dickinson, two very important areas of tradition, but he traveled all throughout the central southwest United States to lots of places.
And
How many,
Mexico,
and Mexico, how many on a typical Sunday, about how many places might he visit to say mass for people?
5 or 6, depending on the closeness of the chapels. He used private planes and he used scheduled airlines. And he expected the rest of us to follow right with him. He had the whole system worked out from his army days. And there was this lovely lady, Mrs. Carlita Brown, who worked as his, I believe, a travel agent, so to speak. And she was on that phone and with her little computer and her typewriter, because we didn't have computer typewriters at the time. And she was laying out these schedules and constantly changing them. You missed a plane, and don't worry, she'd reroute you. So we were doing North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Arkansas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, Tulsa and Oklahoma City, Texas and North Texas and Dallas, and then Kansas City, Kansas City, Missouri, place called Lawrence, I believe, Lawrence, Kansas. I think is that in Missouri or Kansas? I don't remember. I never knew. Where is it?
I think
Wow.
Father Bolduc had 4 million-mile certificates. And on a Sunday, he would take 5 flights to get to these different locations. And today, if I take one flight, I'm wore out. But he would end up taking 4 or 5 flights on a Sunday to get to all these chapels.
Well, I know I was telling Tom when we were preparing for the interview, I never met Father. I never had the honor to meet him, but I heard about him because we spent some time in Oklahoma City, and met some of the families that started the Mass Center in Oklahoma City when Father Baldock was there, when he would come to say Mass in different people's houses or in a property they acquired. And they would tell stories. Sometimes there'd be 5 o'clock, he's supposed to get there. They'd get a phone call. His plane was delayed. He's in the next flight, and people might come to the Mass Center and wait a couple hours on a Sunday for Mass. And it really amazing what that they did. I remember asking one of the gentlemen, "Well, how did people stay? I mean, you're waiting hours." He said, "Well, we figured if the priest could be flying to 4 or 5 different places and doing all this, we could just wait. We should do the least we could do is wait for him." So it's something we should be grateful for. Remember now, many of us who go to beautiful buildings, and there's where I am, there are 7 priests who live here, and there's 3 or 4 masses a day. Forget what those days were like when one priest was traveling across maybe 5 states to bring the mass. Um, Father, you mentioned going? Did you, when you were a seminarian, did you come back to the United States during your breaks and travel, or not? Did you stay in Europe?
I stayed in Europe a good deal of the time. The first
Yeah.
year I came home,
Hmm.
and my third year I came home.
And was there a society mass center near your family, or what did you have to
No, we
do?
were in South Dakota, western South Dakota. There
Yes.
wasn't anything. There were the ORCM priests who were faithful,
Mm.
an organization which doesn't exist anymore, but we inherited much from them. Many of their chapels were taken over by the Size Pius X because they didn't have replacements, so they gladly ceded them to us.
Mm.
And but this Father Fenton was very popular in Rapid City. People liked him very
Mm.
much, and he had a place, usually a rented hall.
Mm.
They actually, when they became a society chapel, they actually built a church. They were doing very well. They were doing very well for a long time. Then there was a problem in the society. in the United States, which has been resolved, thank God. So they no longer have that building, but now they have other property.
Ah, excellent. And then you were ordained in 78, is that right? Or 78?
1978, Father
78.
Bolduc was my assistant priest at
Ah,
the ordination ceremony and at my first Mass.
wow.
And faithful, he was there. And he was there with his photographer. He had pictures and everything. I couldn't believe that man was so organized. But it goes back to his army days, I do believe. And even before that, he had an interest in those things. But when he was in the army, he learned a lot. I guess you do. I guess you do when you work in an office of the army, you learn a lot. And he had the patience of Job, and he could work so hard so that he really absorbed goodness wherever it was around him, and took it with him.
So then you were, where was your first assignment after ordination?
With Father Bolduc in Queen of Angels Parish, Dickinson, Texas.
So did you then travel out on missions for Mass, or
Every,
what were your first
every
years?
Sunday,
Yes.
every Sunday. If you stayed home, if it was your turn to say Mass in Dickinson, you covered the morning Masses. There were three, and you went to San Antonio and said Mass that evening. And in the morning, you were in El Paso, you said Mass in El Paso that evening, and the next evening in Juarez, Mexico, then you came back to Dickinson.
Wow.
There were two other possible routes, but I'll just give you the sample of the one.
Wow. And let's talk a little bit about cultivating vocations, because the priests, a good priest, a priest that young boys and young men see to inspire them, will inspire vocations. So, get your thoughts a little bit on vocations that Father would have inspired. And I know, Mr. Summers, your son is one of those. So here's one of our pictures. This is Father Baldock. And then if you tell us maybe who the other people are in the picture, because I think they're related to
To,
you.
to the right of Father
Yes.
Bolduc is my oldest son, Steve, and down by the statue is Father Patrick Summers. It was his first Holy Communion out in the local chapel here, the Irish Hills.
And he is today, as you said, is ordained. He is over in this himself in the missions. And how many years has he been in Asia?
I'm gonna guess at
Yes,
3 years, and
3 years.
he was in India, and then Post Falls, and then
Yes.
they asked him, or I guess they instructed him to be district superior of
Good.
Asia.
Yes. So we know certainly your son is one, but do you have any estimate of about how many, or some idea about how many vocations may have come from Father's years as a priest?
No, I
Well,
don't. I
No.
know of four actually. The priests have told me that Father was instrumental
Uh,
in their vocation, helping them out.
yes.
Um,
Father
so I can't.
Riccomini for one,
Father Riccomini, yes.
and Father Father Cyprian Rodriguez was a carpenter at St. Mary's. He was one of those who volunteered. He came and helped Father Bolduc, as well as Albert Gonzalez and Cyprian were like brothers from totally various different backgrounds. They both worked as carpenters. There was a third one, Carl something, don't remember. Carl became a holy married man. He had been a convert. But Father Albert Gonzalez, the towering priest, now in residence in Albuquerque, he's kind of an independent, but loves the Archbishop, and he's all for the Society of Pius X. But he and Father Cyprian owe their vocation very strongly. When Father Bolduc passed away, there were so many priests who wanted to have his funeral. And I was fortunate, and then Father Bolduc had appointed me, and I was so grateful to him. The greatest favor amongst many that Father Bolduc did in my life, to have the honor of saying that man's funeral. But I know as the date approached, others wanted to do it. And they had started a rumor, Father Finnegan's not doing the funeral. I am. So in different ones, they wanted the honor because we all knew that he was special. And those men loved him. Father Cyprian was very devoted to Father Bolduc, as was Father Albert Gonzalez. And there were other vocations, I am sure, but we were all limited. None of us covered where Father Bolduc went. I never heard of Mr. Summers until after Father Bolduc was dead. Father Mr. Summers has an entire world of experience other than my own.
And Father Cyprian, you mentioned he's the Benedictine prior, correct? That's the Father
Yes.
Correct.
Yes. So for our viewers, the Benedictine monastery in New Mexico, Silver City, New Mexico, again was founded by Father Cyprian, who's the prior there. So again, but for Father Bolduc, that we may not have had that Benedictine monastery in this country. So
I had a note from Father Cyprian on the book. He read the book, and he was, as Father Finnegan says, influenced quite heavily about his vocation. But he said Father Bolduc remains a great model for all and an inspiration, a hope, and how to deal with the present crisis in the church. It takes visceral fortitude to withstand the evils of our day. Everyone must learn to fight the good fight like the apostles while keeping great charity. Father Bolduc embodied these traits perfectly. May God reward him eternally, and may he intercede for all us who carry on his legacy. Well, that's from Father Cyprian.
Excellent. I know you've received much support for the book. I know you also have a letter from Bishop TCA de Malloret as well that I've seen. But maybe you, and again, as Father said, you knew Father Bolduc as a parishioner, as a member of his flock. How would you describe his sermons? What was he like at sermonizing?
You know, that's a great question because he had the ability to, number one, quite often you'd see him close his eyes and give you a sermon. And I always thought that was interesting. And it turns out he had a photographic memory and he was picturing his speech in his memory, and he would have no notes in front of him. So that was the first peculiar, not a spiritual comment, but wow, I can't believe he did that. But you know, when I listened to his sermons, I guess the reaction always was, I want to take action, either improve my own spiritual um, life or help other people improve their spiritual life. When you got done listening to Father Bolduc give a sermon, you were motivated to improve your life. If you would like, there is on the online site that we mentioned, there's probably 10 of his audio sermons and one of his video sermons out there that you can listen to and get his style.
And we do have I'll show a little clip from in this video. I think I'm going to show, you said was shortly before his death when we were chatting earlier. So let's, yeah, if it will.
That is Father Jonah Garno to the right there.
So we'll just skip ahead. This is towards the sermon.
Of the celebration of the feast of Pope Pius X, Saint Pope Pius X, probably one of the greatest popes that ever lived. He is the one that staved off the revolution in the church for a long time because he opposed modernism and liberalism and even issued encyclicals to that effect, and he warned everybody of what was taking place in the church and what the enemy was planning to do.
So talking about St. Pius X there. And so I think you said this was a week before his death or shortly before?
It was about a week before he died, right?
Wow. Well, the life of a Catholic today, and particularly of a priest, is often filled with hardship. So before we wrap up, let's spend a little time talking about that. We saw that beautiful picture of the big Catholic family that he came from. When Father found tradition and found the Archbishop and remained faithful, what happened with his family? Did his family stay with him and follow him into tradition, or what happened there? Can you share a little bit about that with us?
Sure. His family, as you had in the picture, was 14 brothers, sisters, and the two parents. The father and mother and two brothers stayed with Father throughout the whole time. The other brothers and sisters were recruited very heavily by the local church to be on their board and do this. They did everything they could to make sure that the alliance, that the brothers and sisters didn't line up with Father Bolduc. So, like a lot of families in tradition, there's some splits there where part of them go one way and part of them go another way.
Well, as our Lord said, unless you are willing to leave father and mother, at least his parents stayed with him. But and then the other sad chapter, but which has an happy ending, which we'll get to, is after many years of the life that you described, Father Finnegan, Father Bolduc left the Society of St. Pius X. So can you maybe share a little bit with us what happened there and why Father left?
Am I
Well,
speaking now? Or is it Tom?
No, go ahead,
Tom
Father.
knows the detail. Tom knows
Okay.
exactly the details.
Okay, go ahead, Tom.
there was some money issues at St. Mary's where the money from the fire, the Immaculata that you mentioned, was to be used, the interest only, to run St. Mary's, and more Father ate into the principle, which the agreement was you won't do that. But the end result was Father was in the society for 10 years. It was time for him to take a year of rest over in Econe. He was asked to come over to Econe, and he did not come to Econe. I asked the Archbishop, I said, what happened with Father Bolduc? And I think it was 4 words, he would not obey. And that was really a summary of when your Archbishop says you should come over to Econe, you should obey. And I talked to Father Bolduc in the 1992 time frame, and he said, I let my pride get in my way, and I should have swallowed my pride. That had something to do with pride, and I don't know the details of that, but he recognized that he made a mistake, and that's all we can ask of anybody, is that they admit they made a mistake, and he reconciled with the society. Had his parishioners from Wisconsin be confirmed by the society bishop, and I do have in my letter of possession. I do have in my possession a letter
Right.
that he wrote to the society saying a lot of nice things about how they possess the true Catholic faith, and they're the only ones that truly do. So I think it's a story that started out with a mistake on Father's part, and he fixed it later in his life.
And the chapels that he then serviced during those decades, they tell us where they are now. They've come over to be taken
Yeah,
care of by the
there
society.
were four chapels that he took care of after he left the society, and all 4 of those chapels are now in the society hands, and all of the possessions. There was land up in Canada, land up in Minnesota, all that, along with the treasures. Everybody's heard about Hector the collector. All those treasures are also in the society's hands.
No, and it's that part of, even though it's sad, maybe there was a break. It's a really inspiring story because there are a lot of priests, sadly, who've broken over the years, split. I know one priest told me once, if all the priests that left the society in the United States hadn't left, the United States district would be as large as the whole fraternity now across the world. So, but it takes a really, I think, a strong man to admit, as you said, Father did, and say it was a mistake and reconcile. As far as I think, he's one of the only priests to leave to reconcile. Many of the others, once they cross that line, just can't come back. So it's really truly an honor, I think, his character to admit that and well. But you do mention Hector the collector. So tell us a little bit about the chalice of St. Pius X, because that's a bit of a legendary story.
Well, he got a call. Father Bolduc was. I have trouble with that. I have trouble with another picture, and it's a little funny one. Father Bolduc was a ballet dancer, and actually was told, there was an article that he performed with the Metropolitan Ballet of New York. And ever since I've read that article, when I think of Father Bolduc, I see him in white tights. And it just, I can't get rid of that picture. I can't get rid of it. But he was known all over the world as a collector of rare books, rare vestments, rare religious items, you name it. He was a collector and he knew what they were. So people would call him, and somebody called Father Bolduc that somewhere, I believe in Italy, they were getting rid of all their valuable items. And Father Bolduc went over there and looked at it. And sure enough, there's the chalice of St. Pius X, Pope Pius X. And on the bottom, it had inscribed his name as a priest, and then as a bishop, and then as a cardinal. And then Father Bolduc had inscribed on there the fact that he was a pope. And what was the plan was that this cardinal over in Italy was getting rid of all these items because in the new church we don't need fancy chalices and all that. And by the way, he could make some money on it. His parishioners objected to that, so he had to do it under the covers. And some of the items in that collection were sold to Jewish people to melt down into gold. And so it's a sad story. But the fact that in Guilford, New Hampshire today, the Pius X chalice is there.
Thanks to Father Bolduc. Wow, that's
Yeah.
wonderful. Well, Father, I guess before we wrap up this story, again, we're talking about Father Hector Bolduc. A new book is published, available on Amazon. So you can find all of these stories. It's a wonderful collection of stories and memories. But do you have a favorite memory of Father Bolduc we haven't talked about yet, Father, you'd like to share with us?
I think of the humorous things when we were in the seminary, but it was my knowledge of Father Bolduc is like a tiny flash from a large fire. I was only with him totally for that first year in the seminary. And even that, he was gone part of the year. So I won't explain why, but he was on official duty for the Archbishop. And he had to go to Paris, and he was at the University of Freiburg for a while. But we were theoretically together that first year. The happiest moment, of course, was the time of his ordination. When we prepared for Father Bolduc's ordination, it was the first time anyone had been ordained in this chapel that we were making out of a 300-year-old barn, which had concrete walls, and during recreation, seminarians could volunteer to sledgehammer those walls out so we have a large open space. And we knew Father Bolduc was being ordained. We were preparing that chapel for the ordination of the first priest in that chapel. The Archbishop had already ordained priests for the size of Pius X, once in a local parish church, which was, in union with us and very supportive, and then also in other locations. One was in a monastery in France, but on location in Econe, the first priest ordained was Hector Bolduc. He was ordained in that concrete chapel. That was a moment of moments. And I remember the choir sang extra beautifully. I was with the Schola on that occasion. We were so proud of Father Bolduc and all who were there. A particular close friend of Father Bolduc's, Stephen Kellett, who, for divine providence reasons, left the seminary as he learned that it was not his calling. He had entered at 18. He was a wonderful Australian from Sydney. And he was so much like Father Bolduc. They were both brilliant men and humorous and extremely witty. He was so happy. He rejoiced so much that day. I can still remember it. And I think that is the happiest moment, because all the other moments after my ordination, Father Bolduc was always on the move. And they said if you could catch, but he had put salt on the tail of a bunny rabbit, you could catch him, of a wild rabbit. Well, that'd be like Father Bolduc, but it would have to be blessed salt and have him sit still long enough. He was, in theory, my superior. It was the first place where I went, but he was never home. He was always on the road.
Wow.
Thank God Father Karl Pulvermacher very loyal priest to the Archbishop and to Father Bolduc, was there maintaining that parish. He was the real anchor. And I just wanted to plug that. Father Pulvermacher
Yes.
left his Capuchin order. He was a true spiritual son of Padre Pio because they all had that option when they were such and such an age, and he opted for it. The Archbishop, after a brief interview with the Archbishop at Christmas time, he was asked by the Archbishop, please go and join my dear Father Bolduc in Texas, who was all alone. And he fulfilled that role and never left it. He remained loyal to Father Bolduc right up until, as Mr. Summers pointed out, Father Bolduc chose another road for a short time in his life.
Well, before we finish, as I said when we started, we need to be grateful for those who paved the way for us, and even before Father Bolduc, it's Archbishop Lefebvre. Anyone, no matter where you go to Mass, if you are going to a traditional Latin Mass, that would not exist but for the stand of the Archbishop. It would have disappeared. And you obviously were there in the beginning years of the seminary. Do you have any memories of the Archbishop from when you were a seminarian you'd like to share with us? What it was like to study at his feet?
Well, his conferences were the conference of a father to his sons, and it was amazing how many times he was present in the seminary between visiting with cardinals in the Vatican and always trying to promote traditional calls, always trying to have a door open to us. He was the master of diplomacy and politeness and kindness towards the others. But his conferences to us were magnificent. I felt so privileged to assist at his conferences. And it seemed that we were assisted by the Holy Ghost to understand his words before we could even understand French. And also, with the Archbishop, there was such an aura of goodness about him. He was so humble. How do you get under someone who's the most humble in the room? It's very hard. So we wanted to hide ourselves in his presence, just be with him. We really didn't want to be noticed. We just wanted to be near him. And he would take time out in cold winter evenings. We went down that road that went down to the highway in the evenings, a nice long descent on the icy asphalt. He would walk down with the seminarians. It was prescribed that at that hour we all had to take a little recreation. I remember one of those walks. I couldn't believe that this man among men was walking with us. I will never forget that, my feeling. And I could not empty myself enough of myself to be able to appreciate him. I felt always I was in the presence of someone truly, truly magnificent, some chosen soul of God. Forgive me. That's how I say it.
Oh. Well, thank you for sharing that with us, Father. And thank you, Tom, for your work on the book. Again, it is available at Amazon.com. We'll include the link with this video. It is a Kindle edition. If you have Kindle Unlimited, you actually get it for free, or I think it's $9.99. There's a hardcover for $25, paperback for $15. And really, the amount of hours from listening that went into writing this book, you probably 1 cent an hour from the sale of the book for that, because it sounds like incredible amount of work and diaries and things to go through. So really, truly, an incredible book. I've really enjoyed reading through my copy, and recommend. Christmas is coming up, so get this as a Christmas gift for your friends and family. So thank you, both of us, for joining us this on the night before Thanksgiving. I guess in a Catholic sense, we'd call it the vigil of Thanksgiving, and sharing your experiences with Father Bolduc. And thank you both for making this project happen.
Thank you.
And thank you to our viewers. Please help us by sharing this video, liking and subscribing to our channels to help get this important information. And hopefully, as you're watching this, maybe after Thanksgiving, but you can take a moment this time of the year and say a prayer for all of those priests. So we've talked about many of them, Father Bolduc among them, obviously, Father Post, Father Pulvermacher, and Archbishop Lefebvre, and thank them for what we have today. So thank you all, and I will see you next time.